You are listening to Geopolitics and Empire. Support the Renegade transmission. As always, geopoliticsandempire.com. The Substack, become a paid subscriber, unless you're based in Australia or the United Kingdom, Airstrip 1, where they are now asking for your biometrics. Joining us for the first time, finally, is Mark Goodwin, former editor-in-chief of Bitcoin Magazine, author of the Bitcoin Dollar and Economic Monomyth, founder, or dare I say co-founder of the brand spanking new, the Papercut publishing house. Buenas tardes, señor Mark.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. As we were saying off air, first time caller, long time listener, and I love your feed. I love all the guests. I mean, I really do. I try not to check out too many podcasts, but I do find myself checking out a lot of stuff from your feed. And I mean, Brett Johnson was amazing, and it's lots of great stuff. So I'm super excited to be here.
All right, very cool. And you are like one of my, we'll get into this, you're like one of my go-to guys on the topic we're going to treat, because I haven't really heard anyone else explain it to the doctorate level as you have. Brent has, but he's kind of coming after you, but he doesn't really get into it as much at the technocratic and globalist angle as you two. But just real quick, for anyone who hasn't heard of Mark Goodwin, the quick synopsis, what would you tell them, who your work and experience up till now?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was I went to school for music and was playing in this group and was based in Massachusetts. Then we ended up in San Francisco, kind of toured across the country and stayed there. Like most musicians, wasn't necessarily making a ton of money living in one of the most expensive cities in the world. So, I got a job, believe it or not. And I was working just as like a bar back at this nice cocktail bar. And a guy ended up coming in who was there quite often, a pretty regular guy there, which should have raised some alarms, but perhaps we didn't notice. But anyway, this very, very nice guy came in one day and was like, "Hey, I just bought," this was in like 2014. It's like, "Hey, I just bought a Tesla with Bitcoins." And back when Teslas were like rare, and I was like, what is that? What's Bitcoin? What is this? And he drove me around the block and kind of told me a little bit about Bitcoin, telling me, about how it's this medium of exchange. You can use it online. It's anonymous, and you can, do all this fun stuff with it online. Then we, a couple weeks later, maybe the timeline's a little warped there, but we see in the New York Times that this guy, Blake Benthall, was actually the co-founder of Silk Road 2.0. Right when Ross got arrested, it like basically immediately came back online, and it was this gentleman. I say gentleman because he was always very nice to me. He obviously got arrested, and, former SpaceX employee and yada, yada. And, was like, oh, that's why he was doing all this Bitcoin stuff, and he was using it as this medium of exchange. And so I, got interested in it and, kind of used it a little bit pretty early on, but I literally had no idea that it was something that could change in value. I thought it was just literally like a transport mechanism for online stuff, or, you want to buy drugs online, basically. Like that's what you use this thing for. And, it wasn't actually until the beginning of 2017 that I saw like a headline that, it had broke, $1,000. It was going up again. And I was like, it can go up? Like what? And then, that whole year I basically spent, buying it and learning about it, and was still working at the bar. At this point, I was now bartending. Then there's a huge explosion. It was the first, really big rise. It went up to just about $20,000 at the end of 2017. And then, of course, it crashed pretty epically for the next like year and a half. And so in that next year and a half, I was like, I tried to learn as much about it as possible, and was sort of doing that going into 2020. And just kept learning. I mean, there's so much to learn about it. It's sort of this endless technological stuff, monetary stuff, all of this insanity there. And then COVID happened, and lockdowns happened, and, insane monetary stimulus happened. And, I basically went around, in that March 2020, when all the markets, just everything pooped, gold pooped, oil went negative, Bitcoin went to like, $3,000. and, pretty much called all my loved ones and was like, hey, you should probably look into this thing. They're going to print a ton of money, and, they're locking everything down. They're crushing demand. There's going to be, a reckoning to deal with, what are the economic implications here. At the time, I had no idea about going direct reset and all these things that we now know. And of course, was in the fog of war of what the hell is going on, as we all were. And I think, frankly, we all still are. And we'll get into a lot of that now. I really think now we're in like the other eye of the storm right now, with metals going crazy and just everything being, so uncertain. And because I had basically told a lot of people, hey, I think you should probably get a little bit of this, especially if you're getting stimulus and what have you. I think you should, seriously look into Bitcoin. Then I was like, okay, well, I just recommended it to people. I should probably, formulate some of my thinkings as to why, and try to put it into something that I can hand people. And so I put together basically like a 101, just like hour and a half kind of like little talk, and, did it for some friends, and just sort of wrote stuff. And one of the things I wrote in that process of just, making sure if I'm going to tell people maybe they should look into this, I should be really damn sure. And one of the things I wrote was the birth of the Bitcoin dollar, and was kind of this idea that, maybe March 2020, oil goes negative, everything goes down. And then, in the next 12 months, Bitcoin 20x's and goes to, almost $70,000. That maybe that was really the death of the petrodollar system. We leave Afghanistan, and, we're moving to this new energy based, kind of currency system. And, how stable coins play that role, as the petrodollars used to, and Bitcoin basically plays the role of oil in this new setup. And so I wrote that piece, and, I sent it into Bitcoin Magazine because I had some friends in the city that worked there, and they were like, hey, this is really good. And they pulled me in and asked me to write for them. And then, so I really don't have a background in journalism or anything like that. It was really just this freak guy comes in, I'm working at a bar, tells me about Bitcoin. 7 years later or whatever, I'm a writer at Bitcoin Magazine, ended up becoming editor-in-chief, turned that piece into the Bitcoin dollar book. And then I really extrapolated a lot with Unlimited Hangouts, Whitney Webb. We wrote this series called The Chain that really, like, the book is really this broad stroke. Let's just look at the generals of what's going on here. There's really not a lot of naming of names. I say like Tether and USDC, but I don't say, who are the people, where did this come from? Where did Tether come from, and yada, yada. It's this broad stroke thing. The Chain is really this big investigative look at it. And then I ended up leaving Bitcoin Magazine, for some differences, and just wanted to kind of focus on investigative journalism because I, obviously was very lucky to start working with one of the best ever, with Whitney Webb. And, I had an opportunity to go to Unlimited Hangout and work there. So that's what I've been doing for the last few years. And I'm not sure how quick of a synopsis that was, but that basically sums it up right there for you.
And I'll add, back in 2021, when I was remaking my website, which was just a simple blog since 2015, I actually, in terms of design, I used Unlimited Hangout as one of my sort of models for the current geopolitics and empire website. So you might notice some theme similarities. And just real quick, maybe before continuing, your latest adventure is, if you want to tell us about Papercut Publishing, the first book is going to be Ian Davis. I read the book. He sent it to me. Amazing. He's been on the podcast. It seems like it's not out yet, is it? So tell us about Papercut.
Yeah, totally. So, I had written that piece for Bitcoin Magazine. I wrote a few pieces for them just as a writer, and then they asked me to come on full time to help them with the print magazine that they were starting, because they were, they initially started, ironically, it was Vitalik Buterin, who's now much more known for Ethereum, was a very early Bitcoin Magazine writer. And they had done a print magazine, very early on, and they wanted to bring it back, which they did. And they asked me to come in and basically be kind of the creative lead and editor, of the print magazine before I became editor in chief of the whole group. And, I worked with this amazing team, with Joe Rogers, and my friend, Annabelle, who goes by Baza, who's this amazing designer, and she did all the layout and everything for Bitcoin Magazine, the physical edition. And she ended up leaving the company as well later after I did, and sort of a free agent. And Whitney and I were talking a lot about, like, man, it's pretty difficult to to be publishing all this stuff and using these social networks as the main means of distribution, which we know have a lot of to say the least, just issues. Are these all DARPA programs? Who are running these things? Is it all getting fed into AI? Yada yada. Whatever level of paranoia you want to get to at the end of the day, do we really want to lead everybody into having to go to these platforms to access our content? And one of the things we talked about was getting into physical media, as some of the few people that still do like, long form journalism, well, hey, why don't we, we have this amazing talented artist who does layouts, who's looking for work, and why don't we put together a publishing house? We have, this great opportunity to take a lot of the work we've already done and new work we're planning on doing and turning it into physical medium, so people can read without having to be on Twitter or whatever. It's not to say Twitter is not, still important and useful and yada yada. It's how we met, basically. There's obviously plenty of good things there too, but let's build for a more resilient future if the internet is going to continually become less and less free. So we started Papercut Publishing House. At the start of this year, really the end of last year, and very, very excited about it. We got a lot of really cool things in the pipeline. We will be doing a print magazine as well. But our first, sort of rodeo is The Technocratic Dark State by Ian Davis. And I just love Ian's work so much. He's written a ton of amazing stuff with Whitney at UH, and a ton of amazing stuff on his own and with other people. And what I love so much about the book is I'm so honored to publish it, because I think it's probably the best way to catch up on everything that's going on, every facet of the incoming, panopticon, technocratic dystopia that is slowly encroaching and maybe not so slowly encroaching. And he just does such a good job of breaking it down in a way that's very accessible. Sometimes I read my work and I'm like, okay, did I need 3 paragraphs about every board member of this? But when I read his work, it's incredibly detailed, but it's super easy to read. It's very accessible. You get the points. And I think it's really important that we have, totems like that just, here you go. You want to get caught up? Here you go. And so, we've been doing a pre-order. And it's done basically. The book is being printed now. It'll be shipped out in the next couple of weeks, so people will start to receive it, which is very exciting. So, but yeah, in general, just super stoked about Papercut. I think it's going to be really fun to do a magazine again. And we got a couple book ideas in the works that are coming. The Chain series will be a book as well. And just, it's just fun to be able to make something, and, hold it and see it and flip through it. So, super stoked that Ian decided to work with us on that, and really excited to get it in people's hands.
I look forward to it, but I think it won't be smooth sailing for you. And I give you an example. The other day, I'm a fan of his, Dr. Martin Erdmann. He's a German theologian in Europe. 3 days before he was scheduled to come on the podcast last year, he had his second heart attack, but he's okay now. And he's friendly with Patrick Wood, and he just published, and he touches on overlaps on some of the themes we discuss. And he just published a new book on mercantilism, which is what Trump's policy is now. And, he's been talking about this for a few years. So he's also on the cutting edge. And he wanted to send me the physical, buy it for me on Amazon and send it to me in Mexico. But guess what? The technocracy said, no, this is insane. So the Mexican government has forced all platforms to demand identification from the purchaser. And I know that's the case for me living in Mexico, but I was shocked. This was the first time someone outside in Europe, he put in the order on Amazon for his own book. And then it asked him, because the destination was Mexico, for an ID. The ID he inputted was not accepted, and the book couldn't be sent to me. So this is
Wow.
it's just wild what governments are doing. And this is just an example of the stuff of that we're going to see going forward. And before
Yeah.
getting, yeah,
That's
yeah.
super crazy to me. I mean, that's it. It's not necessarily an original thought, but this idea that, they don't really need to burn books or like ban books. They can just go to the choke points and, distribution and printing and, it's not just at the algorithmic level of, what poster you're seeing or whatever. It's like, well, they're actually preventing physical, it's not digital algorithms preventing you. They're preventing the ship coming into the port and dropping it off at your house, and that's it's a lot more dangerous because, when you see like, oh, they're burning a book or they banned a book, I mean, it's a lot easier to get riled up and, okay, well, let's find a way to circumnavigate it. But when you kind of that slow encroaching boiling of the frogs and, I mean, that's a very disturbing precedent. And that's why we need independent publishers that are like, no, we'll send you a book. We don't care. We'll see. I'm sure we'll get some pushback at some point along the line. I mean, that's pretty inevitable that we will. But yeah, that's very disturbing
You
too.
can just have the cartel, the cartels deal with avocado trafficking and
Right.
limes and, human, and now they'll add with book trafficking,
Yeah. Yeah.
through the
Yeah.
coyotes.
Yeah.
They'll be trafficking, paper cut
Yeah.
publishing.
Yeah. If
So
anyone out there is into trafficking and needs a job, let me know. I got some. No, I'm just kidding. Please don't.
Uh, yeah. So before getting to, the whole Bretton Woods 3.0, as I call it,
Yeah, sure.
chain, real quick. So Bitcoin, I know you've touched on
Yeah.
this. It's my firm belief that this was created by them, Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and it is what it is. This is the new system. They created it. And it's just thoughts on Bitcoin and how after all these years you would explain, just not to go long, just briefly, Bitcoin for me, it just seems like it was gold and then it's a dollar, and now it's just like this third iteration to kick the can down the road for the dollar, but also to bring about this entire, that's a key component of the many key components. You get digital ID, you have digital passports,
Sure.
on and on and on, but Bitcoin is the financial aspect of this, because if you have Bitcoin, then you're going to need like a ledger, you're going to need a blockchain, you're going to need this and tokenization and that. And so I've said for the longest time, this was kind of like the what do you call it? The entree, like the bridge towards, because you got it whet a lot of people's appetites. People got wealthy and like, wow, this is amazing. And then
Right.
before you can figure stuff out, they're already on to step 2 and 3 with CBDCs and blockchains. And so, your thoughts on Bitcoin and then how you classify the space? I see it. The big ones seem to be Bitcoin. It seems to be the one, and then
Sure.
second
Yes.
tier is like Ethereum, XRP maybe, and then the alt and poop coins as they call it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Yeah, so to your point of the made by them, Bitcoin being made by them, I absolutely think so. I mean, I don't have any proof. There is no direct proof. I don't think there ever will be. It's too good of a story. The mythos of this anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto that just, so conveniently at the peak of the 2008 financial crisis, just anonymously releases a white paper on Halloween of '08, and the network launches in January 2009, like right when, that's really when shit hit the fan in regards to the ballooning debt. Obviously we look at, in 71, the gold window shuttering and Nixon, saying, no, you can't redeem your notes for gold. That was, that transition led to a really high inflationary, that the 70s were pretty highly inflationary because we went off this peg. Gold, it's not really thought of that much, but it is an energy currency. It takes a lot of energy to get it out of the ground. Same with silver, the bimetal standard. You want your monetary system to be based on something that's hard to source. Not to just get too much into economics, but just, broad brush, like you want an energy based commodity to be, kind of the main monetary system so that it's not, like just, oh, we'll just control P and debase the currency at will. It's really hard to go get gold out of the ground. There's a limited supply. There's a limited rate of inflation of how much gold can come out of the ground, in a year, 3 to 4%. And that limits growth. Obviously, in a good way, it limits debasement, but also it, theoretically limits growth of an economy. And so the US was sort of, doing some fiat games and was already kind of getting into fractional gold backing of the dollar kind of well before 71. And 71 was really just the US kind of admitting that, okay, trust is sort of lost, in the gold peg. And now we're just, well, hey, let's just sign a thing and just get it over with. But what did we see in the transition in the 70s and 80s? We saw a transition from this energy-based gold standard to the establishment of the petrodollar system, which was similar. That oil is, harder to get out of the ground. There's a limitation of how much can be produced in a year. It's costly. And the specific agreement that we made, of course, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know about this, but with Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East, we gave, military and political favors, basically to say price oil in dollars. So when we print a bunch of money to, meet our budgets and do all the government spending that we do, you are basically forcing everybody that wants to industrialize and get with it, with this, big boom of computers and everything that happened basically in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You want to play in those games. Well, you better buy dollars first to be able to get access to the oil, coming out of these oil rich countries. So what it does was it created basically artificial demand for dollars. So now Saudi Arabia and the ilk have a bunch of dollars sitting around that, Russia and the Eurozone and, anybody in Asia and Europe basically wants to get oil. They have to go to Saudi Arabia, the Middle East. They have to buy dollars first. We have a buyer of dollars. Saudi Arabia has a bunch of dollars now. And then they do this thing called petrodollar recycling, where they send it back to the US and invest back in US treasuries and US companies. And we find a buyer for our debt, and we find, for the treasuries that back the dollar, and we find, a new demand for the actual unit itself for the dollars. And that system worked, pretty damn well, honestly. Obviously, there were a few little interesting things that happened. And I only point them out because of the mirroring of what we saw in 2020 and since. But obviously, we saw in the 80s, Volcker came in and raised interest rates to double digits, which, you can kind of look at interest rates as, okay, we're having this highly inflationary period because we went off the gold standard. Now let's jack up rates to 10%. You want to hold US treasuries because you're getting basically a risk-free yield of getting 10% on your money. So all of this, you just had Brent Johnson on, that was the real dollar milkshake was that let's go to 10%. Let's raise rates super fast. And everybody just wanted as much US debt as possible because it was free, a free risk-free 10%. And obviously we saw a lot of currency, shenanigans go down in that era. That was sort of the rise of the currency speculator, as trade got, digitized and, was able to be, big trades were able to be done, very easily with wire and, eventually internet, but, phones. You got to see some pretty serious things go on with the, kind of the Soros-esque, currency speculators coming in. And that was really the merger of, the mob basically takes over the government and central banks. And, we start to see these crazy plays in foreign exchange speculation and just these huge spikes, of the Mexican peso imploding right after NAFTA. And, who's making all this money off that? Okay, it's Soros and Joe Lewis and et cetera, these guys that now are playing very large roles, Bessent being the Secretary of Treasury, Joe Lewis with his connections with Tether. But anyway, the digitalization of the petrodollar, basically brought us to 2000, to the 2000s. And then we see this big financial crisis of, we saw Larry Summers and friends, deregulate the derivatives industry at the whim of banks. And let's let the banks run wild, and let's let them kind of do whatever they want. Let's start packaging up mortgages and the housing market. We'll put it in these crazy little CDOs and CMOs, and we'll create this huge bubble and blow it up and have everybody lose their money and lose their homes and bail out the banks. But by bailing out the banks, we have to print a ton of money, and that had to be done at the Fed. So 2008 and 2007, that it's 2000. You can just kind of say the great financial crisis. People know what you're talking about, but it was really 07, 08, 09. And that was really the start of when the printing was really, far outpacing, just GDP growth, and the idea that we could grow out of our debt. It's sort of impossible. Now it is just so unbelievably impossible. It's just mathematically impossible. We're literally paying more to service our debt than to service our military, which that is a flag post, right? So just very randomly, at the time that the U.S. is starting to have to deal with these big financial issues of the petrodollar system basically winding down, we see this anonymous guy released this new type of energy commodity that's internet native, that was released just on the cypherpunk mailing list, and it was pretty much ignored for a long time, which is very interesting. You would think that if there was this competing monetary system, that the United States government would do what it had done to basically every other competing. There were other digital currencies that attempted to do these things, other coinage that tried to kind of, make money in the United States and compete with the dollar, that were, absolutely shut down and not allowed to flourish. But for some reason, Bitcoin was sort of ignored at the beginning in those first few years. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And very interestingly, not to get too in the weeds here, but Bitcoin has this very interesting property, where it ends up being about every 4 years, it's coded in this mechanism that's related just to how many blocks have been made. So every 210,000 blocks, there's a halvening, which means that the rate of issuance of Bitcoin that gets issued in every block gets cut in half. So halvening is what they call it. So at the beginning of Bitcoin's life, in 2009, when it came out, to 2012, when again it was, didn't even have a price. 50 Bitcoin were coming out every 10 minutes. It was a highly inflationary currency, and a bunch of people gathered, 50% of all Bitcoin that will ever exist, of this capped 21 million supply, were issued in these, 3 years, basically 4 years, where no one was paying attention. Obviously, people were paying attention. And if you start to look at, okay, well, who were these early people that were controlling the network early on and were getting all these Bitcoin? You start to look at these folks like Charles Cascarilla, who's the head co-founder of Paxos, which is, issuing PayPal's stablecoin now and what have you. And they were controlling a significant portion of the hash rate extremely early on. And he's a former Goldman guy. It's like this idea that it was just, a bunch of libertarian nerds that, were just messing around and they wasted it all and no one knows where it all went. It's like, no, there were huge institutions there very early on. They were just extremely secret about it. And frankly, a lot of people don't know who owns a lot of the Bitcoin that was issued at that time. Bitcoin is pseudo-anonymous, so you can create a wallet and mine to that wallet or transfer that wallet. And there's no identity directly connected to it. Certainly early on, there wasn't a lot of analytics looking at who's creating this wallet, who bought it off an exchange, etc. And there was a lot of actual potential privacy early on for users because no one was paying attention and no one cared. And you could argue that governments and intelligence were right there at the beginning and gathering these huge stashes of Bitcoin. But regardless, it's this highly inflating currency. Every 10 minutes there's 50 more Bitcoin. 50% of all Bitcoin were mined in those first few years. And then the issuance goes down to 25 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. That takes us to 2016. By 2016, there's a price. It's starting to get some interest. There's people actually using it. And so it leads us to our next, to the next halvening that would have been, in May of 2020. And so we start at 50, we go to 25, we go from 25 to 12 and a half Bitcoin, and then we go to 6.25, which would be May 2020. So interestingly, right before the COVID breakdown happens, where, they lock everybody in their homes, they print trillions and trillions of dollars, they crush demand, they keep the monetary velocity, they call this going direct, this plan that Larry Fink and Trump and BlackRock, kind of put together months before the virus even happened. Very interestingly, it lines up very nicely with right before the issuance of Bitcoin is about to finally go below the relative issuance of 3% to its total supply. So as it's about to actually go below the rate of the target inflation rate of the dollar and the rate of gold coming out of the ground, we see this really big political financial move to basically give trillions of dollars to BlackRock, where they're able to buy their own ETFs and kind of manage it. It's called going direct. It's like, let's give it, the idea was let's give it to Main Street, but in reality, it was right to Wall Street. And so that's all planned in, August and September of 2019. We see the repo markets explode and go crazy in that same time in fall of 2019. And then all of a sudden, a whisper of a virus comes out of China. By January, everyone's pretty scared of it. By March, it's shut down. All the markets implode. And they basically geared up to print, trillions and trillions of dollars, hand it to Larry Fink and his friends. And it's, weeks away from when the Bitcoin halvening is about to bring Bitcoin mathematically below the issuance of gold coming out of the ground, the rate of gold coming out of the ground, and the target rate of the dollar. Again, when you're looking at, the mirroring of going off the gold window and the 2008 crisis, is it a mistake? Is it just a coincidence that all of this is occurring at the same time? Is it? I'm sure coincidences do happen, but when it has to do with the monetary system and something that is this important, I mean, the United States, we just know that it is an empire, and they will do anything it takes to retain the net purchasing power of the U.S. economy. They don't care about the purchasing power of the individual dollar. They care about that it is stronger than everyone else's. And, that is where we get into these, dollar milkshake ideas. And, yes, everyone's currency is debasing, but they're going to all debase into the strongest currency, which is the US dollar. So the US dollar looks terrible, but also it's so much better than pretty much everyone else's. And, are they going to just have everybody dump treasuries and leave the US dollar system without a fight, without a plan, without, a very complicated, we know the US has put so much money into developing the internet. It was a DARPA project. We know how much money they put into developing social networks, which is really early, digital ID, how much, money they put into developing, everyone loves to talk about PayPal mafia, but no one talks about PayPal. PayPal, they made the native currency of the internet the dollar. And that is the most important thing that's happened in the dollar's history, since the Nixon, the gold shock, the Nixon shock, right? I mean, easily, probably even more important. And, everyone likes to look at all the things they built afterwards and LinkedIn and YouTube. And yeah, I mean, the list is insane, the people that everything that came out of it. But PayPal itself was an extremely important idea. And Levchin and Thiel, the two main guys there, alongside David Sachs, who's now running crypto and AI for Trump. But, they really understood what the game was here, and we know where the internet's going, and because we built it, right? And they're working with intelligence, as they, very, very brazenly say. Levchin said when he was working, creating the cryptography and everything for PayPal, that he was collaborating with every 3 and 4 letter agency that, he could get a meeting with. He initially applied for the NSA and was like, I want to use cryptography to help the country. And they were like, great idea, but you'll never make any money doing it in the public sector. So go to the private sector, and go apply cryptography for the good of the nation in the private sector. Happens to get a call, hey, go to Palo Alto and go meet this currency speculator, hedge fund manager Peter Thiel, who was extremely young and not really famous or doing anything at the time. Obviously, we now know, steering committee Bilderberg guy, and he's Peter Thiel. I don't need to say that, but he just ends up on this guy's couch, Scott Bannister, who became an early PayPal board member, who was a VP at this Idea Labs, this sort of incubator in Southern California, which ended up being where the founder of Tether ended up coming out of as well through Clearstone Ventures, Brock Pierce. But he ends up on his couch and goes to a meeting, meets Peter Thiel, and they found PayPal the next day, and then they dollarized the internet. Again, I don't think these things are really coincidences. They're just very brazenly saying, we're working with intelligence. We're taking all of this, all of the money that was coming out of Stanford, so much of it was coming from the National Science Foundation and DARPA from the Pentagon to develop Google, to develop Sun Microsystems. The S in Sun Microsystems, the SU is Stanford University, and these are the guys that created, all the switching software, all the hardware, everything that connects the internet and makes the internet. All of this was happening, via funding from the United States government, knowing, hey, if we create, Facebook and we say it's a government program, no one's going to fucking use it. But if we release it through the private sector, people will use it. If we release PayPal saying it is a government program, people will get scared and not use it. But if we say it's this wonderful, innovative thing coming out of Silicon Valley, people will use it. And I think you just start to see the plays of how the government and the people behind the government, understood the public perception of government created versus private sector. And so the internet and everything started absolutely just within the Pentagon and then completely spread out and splintered. It's so hard to tell where the funding goes, where all of this stuff is coming from. But the ideas and the core funding and the core technology, whether it's Google, whether it's PayPal, Facebook, these were government projects. Of course, everyone knows about Palantir, right? That's the big boogeyman right now, which is so great that everyone's paying attention to it. It started as the fraud algorithm at PayPal. And obviously there's a lot of stuff to read about their intelligence connections too. But all of this stuff is kind of going on. The US government and its private sector, ghoulies, absolutely, they're building something by design. And they very well understand that if they can win the internet and they can win e-commerce, that they will win basically the global economic system. And if we can figure out a way, once we win the retail forward version of it, like PayPal, then, okay, well, how do we digitize capital and digitize reserve assets? How do we create something where we can have, scarce digital commodity? Like, is that even possible? There's a lot of issues with trying to digitize something you want to be scarce. I can right click a JPEG and save it on my computer. If that's a $5 bill, that's an issue because I can just print them at will and double spend them and all this. How do you solve these core issues, these economic issues? If we know that, the only chance the US monetary system has of surviving is not only leading the digitalization and tokenization of commodities and of capital, but dominating it, And so to me, this idea that this is, an accident and a fun little thing that someone created, I would love for that to be the case. I would love for this to be a cypherpunk, let's take the power back and destroy central banking and get out of the tyranny of financial control, which is one of the best levers of controlling humans. But when you actually look at the system that's being built, which is, what my book and research does, it really doesn't decentralize anything. Really what it's actually doing ultimately, I think, with the stablecoin system paired up with Bitcoin is it's actually going to it will satisfy that primordial urge of neutering all central banks, but unfortunately it leaves one, and that one is the Federal Reserve. And so when you create digital dollars that there is no way to stop capital flight and people taking money out of your country because they can just use a smartphone and get a wallet and get their money into dollars and then send it wherever they want with the smartphone. The central bank of XYZ, really loses all of its ability to keep money, keep its citizens in its currency. And so the end result of this system is the greatest centralization of monetary policy in history, where we actually have a global financial system that will be run by the Fed governors. And in reality, it will really be the Treasury. And in reality, it will be a couple issuers that are just playing ball with the Treasury, who most likely were put in that position in the same lineage of the private sector ghoulies doing the behest of the government. Who are these people being the main stablecoin issuers, like a Tether, a USDC, a PYUSD for PayPal? When you start to look at, who are these people, there's an intense amount of ties to intelligence and to, these groups of people that have been so well documented, that, really do run things. So, it's just so hard for me to believe that this is an accident, knowing that the U.S. government will do whatever it takes to dominate and lead, and run the show, and that, I think that, very importantly, and I'll stop because I know I've been ranting, but very importantly, I think this framework works regardless of you are subscribed to the multipolar world or subscribe to multipolarity is fake and yay, right? So I think the idea that okay, if we look at the multipolarity angle and we say, okay, BRICS is actually competing with the US dollar, and okay, here we go, and a gold backed tokenized gold is going to compete with the US dollar and US treasuries. Well, the U.S. government has, and the public companies in the United States has way more Bitcoin than anyone else in the world. It's not even close. And so, if they were going to remonetize an asset and basically inflate the U.S. dollar system into an asset, which they could do tomorrow, they could pay their debt by raising the price of gold to $30,000 an ounce and redeem it at the Fed, and they could solve their debt crisis tomorrow. But what would be the outcome of that? Anyone that holds an ounce of gold now has $30,000, and all of these countries that hold all of this gold are now worth an insane amount of money, and they don't have to pay it to anybody. They just hold the gold and they win. So why would the U.S., assuming it's a multipolar world, why would the U.S., being the world reserve currency, inflate into gold or silver when they could inflate into this thing that they hold that no one else really holds in any meaningful way, and they can debase the US dollar into Bitcoin and keep all that value on shore? Obviously, they would do that. And then, assuming multipolarity is just a joke, and we're in this sort of post-polarity world, which I would like to think a lot of us think that way post-COVID, where every single country in the world basically had the exact same, policy. I think in the non-multipolar world, I think the Bitcoin standard still makes way more sense in terms of surveillance and control of where this wealth is going, because Bitcoin is transparency technology. It's beautiful in the sense that you can see, okay, no one is debasing it. I can see that in the code. I can audit that and know there's only 21 million, and that unit will never be debased. It will never be changed. Great. But also, every transaction ever made is recorded in a public ledger that anyone can see. And when we have these databases like a Palantir and et cetera, and they can do internet analysis and are able to take all of this other data that's scraped from social media and from internet service providers, they have a pretty good idea, if you're using exchanges, like who owns the Bitcoin, and et cetera. So it actually gives them a much better way to track and control massive amounts of wealth. They're going to make billionaires if they inflate Bitcoin to $1 million. Like, tons of billionaires will be born. It's a much easier way to control those billionaires by using Bitcoin versus a gold standard, in my opinion. So I think even in the polar and the non-polar frameworks, I think the Bitcoin standard makes a lot of sense for the central planners.
So many threads there. I was just going to mention earlier, as you said, they built the, DARPA basically. I view it not just as the U.S. For me, it's globalist. The American deep state it's not just it's the globalist
Sure.
American
Totally.
deep state, and all this that they built. I think they're still continuing to steer the trajectory of where they want to take us, which is a world empire, something we've never seen before to this extent. And I think, in a sense, it could be said the final world empire. And
Sure.
I often call PayPal Pentagon Pal. I've been calling it for a long time. I'm banned from it.
Yeah.
Pentagon Tube. I just learned from James Corbett in his latest missive. Polymarket, DARPA. The connection
Oh yeah.
is clear.
Oh yeah.
I had
Oh yeah.
no idea. And then I was looking at your feed today, and Bermuda, was it Brian Armstrong from Coinbase saying Bermuda is like the entire country is going on chain, is going to use Tether, the dollar stablecoin through Coinbase. We've already seen El Salvador. Iran central bank just bought $500 million of Tether stablecoin, and it's almost like Borg, right? Resistance
Yeah.
is futile. And what this sort of means then, because for the longest time, I've been a collapsologist on geopolitics and empire, talking to the Morris Bermans and the Johann Galtungs and the Stephen Kinzers and others. But then after a while, I'm kind of like, something's not adding up. It's been, some of the collapsologists have been saying America is going to collapse for 30 years, 40 years.
Yeah.
50 years. And it's kind of like people are getting, I did these recent podcasts on the multipolar stuff, and they threw Gaddafi to the dogs, Russia and China. They threw Assad, they threw Maduro. Like, I'm sorry, they're weak. And this is just a reality. All right. I'm not saying I want it to be like this, but this is how it is, and so I'm seeing now, it feels like America is going to become this sort of like a colossus. And that will be the mechanism, the framework through which world empire is imposed. And then what you just outlined, this sort of digital dollar stablecoin, is just going to stablecoinize the rest of the world, and through that way sort of entrench and just take over the planet. Just and any thought there, and then because then you get tokenization and everything.
Sure,
Did
yeah.
you sort of see that trajectory?
At the 100 billion 1,000%. Yeah, unfortunately, I do. Again, I'm not rooting for these things. This is probably another section in general, but people really get upset about me talking about Bitcoin as if I'm this big Bitcoin shill, and I'm like, Bitcoin's going to save everything. Just orange pill your friends and everything, freedom, and it's going to be. It's like, no, I'm like shouting from the rooftops that the actual outcome of a hyper Bitcoinization, moment where we monetize Bitcoin into a multi-trillion-dollar market cap, like the end result is not going to be peaches and cream for everybody. In fact, it's going to be very difficult for the vast majority of people. Not many people own Bitcoin and are going to be able to be in a position where they can actually utilize that monetization in a way that brings actual like freedom to people. There's a lot of downsides to it. And so I have argued that I think people should consider owning some in self-custody and be prepared that the US government might throw its debt bubble, use Bitcoin basically as this vacuum, blow out the debt, which they've done, and then implode it into Bitcoin. Maybe if they're going to reset the world financial system, wouldn't you want to own some of that thing that they're going to implode into? It would be like arguing at like the onset of Bretton Woods 1.0 that, you shouldn't own gold because the globalists are going to use gold. It's like, well, yeah, no shit. But don't you want like your grandkids maybe to to have a home and a good time? If like where we're going is where we think we're going, there could be this bifurcation of basically a new class formation of those who held assets that appreciated and those that don't. And like, you talk about poly market and prediction markets being, a DARPA project, be part of kind of a derivative of the TIA, which became Palantir. It's all part of this financialization of everything. Everything's debt. Let's financialize buying a burrito and getting it delivered to your house. You can put that on credit and pay it in 5 payments. And I mean that whole system is pushing more and more desperate people into owning no assets, and being eventually will be relied on, most likely a universal basic income of some kind, and most likely paid by a stable coin, potentially issued by a private sector entity, which is, that's like Musk's new thing now. Is he's like, Tesla's goal is to produce a high, universal high income or something. Like, I forget the phrase he used, but basically, like, we want to have so much deflationary effects from our AI technology and autonomous technology that then we can give you $3,000 a month in PYUSD, via X payments or whatever, and then you can just, that just creates like so much more dependency on centralized control. And so, like, my argument for Bitcoin is not, just own it and you're free and everything's great. It's like, no, it's probably going to this really, really bad place. But I think it's worth considering holding some in case they do this. But I get a lot of shit as if I'm this Bitcoin shill, and like, how can you talk about the dangers of digital money and tokenization and all the control and surveillance and all that, and then tell people they should buy Bitcoin? It's like, well, because I think it might save them. It might keep you out of being in the stablecoin slave class. And do I want the world to go that way? No, but I really do think that most likely the outcome of Bitcoin monetizing will be a less free world, which is a scary thing, and I don't like it. But I would like my loved ones to be able to have a piece of that new financial system, and it's worked out for me, right? I mean, I've been able to walk away from jobs, and in 2020 when all that was going down, I was going back to school for electrical engineering, and I had 1 semester left to finish to get a degree in electrical engineering. And they wanted me to, participate in, the whole thing. I don't want to get you demonetized or whatever. And I was able to walk away from it 1 semester away and not conform and get the inoculation, because I was like, okay, well, I don't want to do that. And I can do that because I have this buffer of savings that came from me being a bar back and someone saying, hey, you should check out this thing. And so, I that's where my framework is coming from. And so I think I have every right to criticize Bitcoin while also saying maybe get some. Also know that it could go to zero. That's absolutely possible. This is right now we are in the fog of war, 3.0 or whatever. COVID was really the real fog of war of not really knowing. Everything went down in tandem. I mean, the Dixie went down, the dollar index went down, gold went down, oil went. I mean, everything just went down. Stocks went down. It's like, okay, well then shouldn't this have to be going somewhere? Like, shouldn't this economic energy have to get pushed into some area? And right now, I think we're in that again, where it's just gold and silver are just going absolutely insane. Stocks are just, I mean, right now the market is being run by true social posts. It's a Trump tweets something and the markets move multiple percents. I mean, it's insanity. And we know, Trump is not fighting the deep state. I mean, he is a member of the deep state, a card-carrying member who was put in position and arguably was allowed to win and was selected to play this role for this transformation. I mean, he is a chaos agent, and he understands debt and bankruptcy more than anyone else. I mean, he went bankrupt, and Rothschild Inc. and Wilbur Ross bailed him out. And then he brings Wilbur Ross in his administration in the first term, right? I mean, he is beholden to these debt plays. He understands this system very well, and he was put in place to do exactly what is happening now. So it's like, okay, we're invading Greenland. Okay, we're brown bagging, Venezuelan leaders. Okay, we're I mean, it's just every day you just look and it's just another thing, and the markets are reacting so much to it, and it's trying to create chaos and uncertainty. Because in the chaos and uncertainty and in the volatility is where you have big change. I mean, that's how you create big change. And so to me, when I look at, well, what is the volatile new thing that's here, that's arrived, that, wasn't there in '08 necessarily? What's the new big thing? Obviously Bitcoin, yes, but I think the whole new digital financial system in general, I mean, it's ready. It's been built. It's ready to go. And, I've seen some pretty good analysis of people saying things like, I don't, the idea that Bitcoin would just shoot up and get extremely expensive, it's just without some sort of catalyst, is so crazy to me. Like the market is not just going to drive it to $200,000 a coin. And it's like, yeah, I agree. It's not. But that it would be an announcement. It would be a sort of like, okay, the US is doing this. Okay, the Japan bond market just blew up. Where's the carry trade go? Okay, gold just added how many trillion? Silver just added how many trillion? Where does that money go? Does it leave? Does it keep going? So when I look at like, well, what's the new kid on the block? What's the new system that we can all be ushered into? It's like, well, frankly, they just swapped the faces of the Great Reset agenda. They really just they replaced Klaus Schwab with Larry Fink, but they're doing the same fucking thing. And so this idea that, these guys are here to, take on the city of London and take on the Brits and Israel and this lobby, this transnational, transfraternal, transgenerational lobby that really controls everything. This idea that it's coming from these people, from like a Besant stooge or from a Soros stooge, Scott Bessent and Lutnick, and it's just, to me, it's insanity. These guys have built the new financial system, and they're ready to create the chaos to bring us into that new system. So what does that chaos entail? Well, I think we're seeing the beginning stages of it. Obviously gold and silver doing what they're doing is a very bad sign. The Japan bond market blowing up is a very bad sign. Things are broken. They have been broken. And so what's the fix? What can really fix this? To me, it seems pretty obvious that, these are the guys, Fink is telling you the future is tokenization. We want every single thing to have a little QSIP and a little number and be published on a blockchain, every transaction, every single thing, published for eternity so that everyone can see it and yada, yada. And they're telling us that that's what they want. And it gives them a huge advantage to do that and to be first. BlackRock is now one of the biggest holders of Bitcoin in the world. They have like over 1 million Bitcoin. The IBIT, their Bitcoin ETF's the fastest growing ETF in history. Does Larry Fink and Trump and his family now being super involved in Bitcoin and all this, like, do they want to blow up that market? Or do they want to try to find a new way to save the dollar, make retail really happy, and make a bunch of Americans pretty rich while like collapsing the currencies around the world into the dollar system as the dollar, the dollar is over levered, but every other currency is over levered against the dollar. So we're going to see this pop. And I think that catalyst could be a crash. It could be a huge recession. It could be let's inflate away out of everything. It could be tariffs,
alien invasion.
It could be aliens, right? I mean, we're at the Project Blue Beam moment. Like, I don't trust anything that I hear now. I just think it's so lunacy, so insane. So how can I be as least dependent on these insane people and this insane system? And to me, it's like, own physical assets, like definitely own gold and silver. I think you should own Bitcoin. I think you're crazy not to, even though it could go to zero, and don't ruin your life leveraging, trading, and doing all this stupid shit, but hold a little bit in self-custody and, get land, try to, get off the dependency of the government's teat. Because I think the pop is coming. And I don't know when it will come. I don't know what it will look like, but to me, I think it's starting. And there's just too much going for the digital tokenization, stablecoin, Bitcoin dollar system to me, that I think if they didn't do it, in a way I would be relieved, but I just don't think that they would let that opportunity go.
I've got the same view pretty much as you, on all of this, and as you say, it's survival. And I won't name names, but people in the podcast space have said, "Oh, if you use digital currencies, you're supporting the agenda." I mean, but what's the alternative? It's like, the line in the sand will come later, as you meant with the injection. It's like, here, commit suicide. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. Or as I mentioned earlier, when I referenced biblical terms like mark of the beast and worship and allegiance and change of your own personal moral values, it's like, no, that's where the buck stops. I don't care what the cost is, but we're not there yet. And some of these people said, well, I'm like, okay, if we use that logic that I can't use Bitcoin, I mean, I've been using the dollar all my life. The globalists one world
Exactly.
currency. The dollar is like
It's the great Satan.
right. I mean, it's the beta version of the one world currency. And then I was thinking in my mind to this person, well, like, okay, if that's your logic, you're still using a bank account with dollars and buying stuff from supermarkets that are owned by BlackRock. If you want to put your money where your mouth is, you're going to go live in the woods, and you're not going to go buy a hammer at Home Depot because BlackRock has shares in Home Depot. So you're going to have to fashion your own hammer to be able to cut down your own wood. I mean, so there's an incongruency there. And what you mentioned about these multipolaristas, you hear me complain about them all the time. They are like QAnon 2.0. You
Oh
mentioned
yeah,
what you're referring to are the LaRouchites. They've now rebranded as Promethean Action or whatever.
sure.
And at least with you, you're like, this is how the situation is. This is what you can do to survive. But a lot of the multipolaristas, not all, but I think some are being paid. They're Pied Pipers being paid,
Sure.
and they're sitting back there living the life, telling you something that's completely false, and then you're going to end up completely screwed. So that's not cool.
Yeah.
They're raking it in, but at least you people like you are like, okay, here's the situation. Here's how you cannot get screwed. No?
Yeah. And I'm saying it's like you could lose everything. It's like I mean anyone saying that they know what is going to happen is a charlatan, and they are lying to you, and they're lying to you for a reason. And a lot of people do that in the Bitcoin space. And I left the Bitcoin space because I couldn't fucking deal with the propagandists and the state, welcoming of, oh man, like Poppy Warp Speed Trump is now shilling Bitcoin. Like, this is amazing. I'm like, no, he locked the country down and printed trillions of dollars and rushed medical treatments and is a scumbag. I mean, what are we talking about? I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. He is pushing the technocratic agenda faster than like anyone else on the planet. Like, what are we talking about? Who are his handlers? Who are the people around him that he's surrounding himself with? It's like, I would love for Q to be real, right? Like, let's be honest. It would be awesome because we do know that there is a cabal of people running shit. Whether or not they're doing all the things the Q people and Pizzagate people and whatever are they're actually doing that, who knows? But, I would love for that to be true. I would love for there to be a movement of an American-based movement of people sure, I'd love that. I'd love it to be true. And I have a lot of sympathy for people that do think Trump is doing that or did think Trump was doing that. But at the same time, it's like, I think we've learned the lesson. He's not doing that. He campaigned on the second time for being a pro-peace candidate and all these. He's broken so many promises and then just pretends he didn't. And the fact that people, I mean, that to me, the Trump derangement syndrome is inverted to now, if you were a sycophant for Trump, it's like you have Trump derangement syndrome. And that's not like a unique thought I have. I know a lot of people have said that. But yeah, to me, it's like, I think there are lines in the sand that you should have. And for me, like digital ID, I'm not fucking with that. I'm not doing that. I didn't do the shot or whatever. Those are the lines in the sand to me are obvious when they present themselves. I'm not an AI guy. I get so scared of people using AI because I have worked at a place that used AI and incorporated it really quickly on in the media production, the news aggregate, not so much, the actual, editorials and stuff. But like I saw how quickly it went from being like, okay, let me turn this PR into an article to let's just run it through ChatGPT and just send it on, whatever. And then like, let's make the image with that. And like, I understand. And again, I sympathize with the efficiency gains that you can get from using it. But to me, it defeats the purpose of being human. And like, we should create and like that. Why are we using AI to replace like writing and music and art instead of like, how do we get more zucchinis out of a plot of land? And how do we make more efficient energy? Like, there are things you could use AI for if you want to do it, but why are we replacing like the human elements of creation? That's like probably the reason why we're here. It's to create and, and make more of us and what have you. And to me, it just seems so inhumane to do that. And so that to me is the line in the sand. But a lot of people say, well, how can you be against AI? But think Bitcoin's fine. It's like, well, for me, you can make like 3 clicks on your computer and put Bitcoin in cold storage and literally throw it in you can just memorize 12 words and literally never touch a computer for 10 years and then come in and do it and then trade it for a property or something, It's not this like it's not you don't have to use it every day to benefit from it. It's not this it doesn't change the way you think or interact with how you create or what you use. It's like it's like saying like buying gold is going to convert you into being, or using the dollar is going to make you somehow aligned with the evil people that are using gold or using the dollar or using Bitcoin. I don't think that's the case. These are commodities. And I just disagree. To me, it's an easy, like, I sleep totally fine at night, because I know how much freedom it has given me in my personal life. It's just, I've lived that. So I have many lines in the sand. Paper cut publishing is going to be like strictly no AI. And that's like, again, I sympathize with people that use it in the same way I sympathize with people that use stable coins that live in Argentina and their local currency is getting inflated up the ass. Like how could I not sympathize with that? I would be a sociopath. It's like, okay, you just lost 50% of your wealth in 3 months. And all you could do, you could use Tether instead, and it would be better. Like, I get that. Of course, I'm not a monster. But what is the second order effects of everybody doing that and everybody opting out of local currency and everybody using Tether, who is on board of the FBI and the Secret Service and law enforcement, and the CIA funded chain analysis? Like, they're all on their software. They've seized billions and billions of dollars of tokens. Like, this isn't a permissionless technology. Bitcoin at least has some elements of permissionless. I wouldn't say it's really as decentralized as people say it is. I think it's more the consensus is distributed, but that, it gives you some things that, you can be assured that if you're holding Bitcoin, it's not going to be debased. And that as long as you hold it, that you will be able to spend it, if you hold enough of it and you can pay the fee. Like, that system is not going away. What's going to go away is your ability to get access to that system. And if they monetize Bitcoin very quickly, which it probably already has kind of happened, sure, it crashed 40%, but it's still at like $90,000 a coin. Most people can't get access to a whole Bitcoin anymore. And again, you don't need a whole Bitcoin, but it used to be like, okay, you could kind of you could get a little bit of it. You could get a quarter of a coin kind of easily if, you saved your money. And I mean, I got my Bitcoin from working as a barback. The money I saved, instead of spending it, I stopped drinking and doing drugs. And instead of spending my money on beer and drugs, I just threw it into Bitcoin instead. And, I'm able to be decently, I'm not balling or anything by any means, but I'm financially like, okay, which is a very rare thing. And a lot of people in our industry are not. And it's like, it's a reality. It's like, it's very hard to do this and not get, tied into other interests because of financial things. It's extremely difficult. And I was able to do that. That opportunity gets less and less and less as Bitcoin monetizes. Less people are going to be able to use it permissionlessly. They're going to have to use it on custodial services. They're going to have to use stable coins. And those systems are very dangerous. So to me, the line in the sand of self-custody Bitcoin is like, that's a no-brainer. But like right after that, it gets really, really hazy. And I think that's why I've been trying to raise hell in the Bitcoin space and in the independent media space, because I think it's very misunderstood, from a technological standpoint, from an economic standpoint. There's a lot of people that talk their book. I'm obviously talking my book, but a lot of people are talking their book, whether it's hijacking Bitcoin and Bcash. And, it's like, well, there are a lot of things that community is correct about. There's a lot of things the Monero community is correct about. There's a lot of things the Ethereum community is correct about. There's some things the XRP community is correct about. But at the end of the day, I think there's really only one system that can slightly offer you a slice of permissionlessness. And to me, that's Bitcoin. And the other ones are all, at best, slightly permissioned, if not completely permissioned. And that does not mean that they will not monetize and become extremely wealthy. There is obviously if banks and governments wanted to come together and decide to use Ethereum, or decide to use XRP, or whatever, any of these other kind of altcoins, that would obviously make that network be worth a ton of money. But none of those are commodities because they rely on centralized issuance or centralized validation, or, just so many of the other issues that happen when you make money digital. I think Bitcoin is a unique thing. It will not be replicated. And it was probably created by US intelligence to act exactly as that, as the neutral internet reserve asset that is captured from a supply standpoint, and it's captured by US interests. And, you know, so to me, the line in the sand is very far from self-custodying and using, you know, I sleep completely fine at night making a payment in Bitcoin. I don't think I'm supporting. I've been called an establishment Zionist cuck because I paid someone in Bitcoin, and to me, it's just it's so lost from the reality of what's happening. Yeah, that's, I don't know where I'm at here, but that to me, it's just I think about it so much because I'm new to this game in many ways. I haven't been in this game for very long, and so I still read the comments and still get confused by people saying things. And that one for me, I would actually wanted to kind of say a lot of these things tonight, so I'm glad I got a chance to rant on it.
No, I mean, and this is why I was drawn to your work, because your assessment, you explain it way better than I do, but it's pretty much how I see it from where I'm coming from. And I appreciate that you say it can go to zero as well, because I've been saying this for the longest time, where it's like, you referenced it earlier, they've invested so much into the infrastructure, momentum. As the train picks up speed, it's picked up momentum. It ain't stopping, right? The whole
Right.
stablecoin, blockchain,
Sure.
Bitcoin,
Yeah.
it's being built out. So that's why, I bring on Brent Johnson and others, and it's like, it seems right now they're having success. It's being built out. The train ain't stopping. At some point, and I put in some of my, readings of Bible and prophecy. I could also, I'm not sure, I could see it collapsing somehow. Maybe Putin, he's always there. He seems very Zen-like he knows something we don't. It can't collapse tomorrow. So I don't know. And either one can happen. And I'm ready, if I buy some Bitcoin, it can go to zero. Nobody knows. But it seems right now it's being built out.
It's very funny that you bring up the Putin thing too. This is another thing I wanted to mention. In September of last year, a high-ranking Putin advisor, I don't know his name off top of the hand, but you can find it, I'm sure, did a speech where he was talking about how, at the Kremlin, basically saying like the U.S. is going to weaponize cryptocurrency as a way to solve their debt crisis. And they're going to use stable coins to create demand for treasuries because they just passed the Genius Act, which codifies the idea that stable coins have to be backed by U.S. government debt, and they can't just be, algorithmically created. I have a whole piece in the chain about the controlled demolition of Luna Terra, which was a Bitcoin-backed stable coin that was done by a Thiel fellow that no one ever talks about. But I mean, it was this coordinated implosion of, we could make stable coins. This is another good point. Like, I'm not against the dollar because it's a unit of account. I have nothing against the dollar being a unit of account. The issue is that it's backing the U.S. government and the U.S. empire. And when you want to create dollars, you have to buy U.S. treasuries to create dollars. So when you are using the dollar system, you are perpetuating the servicing of the United States government's debt, and therefore its empire and all the things it's doing. That's the issue. The issue is not the unit of account. The idea of a dollar is fine. The issue is you are paying for the U.S. government to do all the things that it does, the military stuff, the intelligence, whatever. So people had actually created these algorithmic, stable coins that used Bitcoin to create stable value in this dollar tokens. And then literally this guy, Ryan Park, was a Thiel fellow, and he created the system to blow it up. And he created this crazy yield bubble within the system, and the Terra Luna play exploded. And in the Gillibrand and Lummis bill that was transmuted into the Genius Act, they reference it a bunch of times as like, this is why we can't have, stable coins backed by anything but U.S. treasuries. They have to be U.S. government debt because look at what they did. They caused billions of dollars of damage and all this. It's like, well, that was like an obvious like false flag, like much like FTX was, and it was they were very associated events. But it was to create consent for, rah, we can't have this happen again. We need to have the stablecoins need to be backed by U.S. treasuries. And like, that's the issue. So the Genius Act codified that in law, that to be a stablecoin provider and be in the jurisdiction of the United States, which if you want to be anything, you have to play ball with the jurisdiction of the United States. You need to back your stablecoins with treasuries. And so this advisor to Putin was basically like, they're going to create an insane amount of demand for treasuries and inflate the debt away into this new incoming, let's go, everything is fractionally reserved. Let's go to whole reserves, and let's go to everything being backed. And we can change all of the bank deposits in all the, the big four banks and change them all to stable coins. And then we create, $7 trillion of demand for US treasuries overnight because we're swapping the zeros and ones in your bank account to now being stable coins. And now we have to back them with treasuries. It's 1-to-1, yada, yada, yada. So anyways, in mid-September, this advisor comes out and says, this is what the US is doing. They're going to weaponize crypto to solve their debt. And then immediately after that, like a week and a half later, something like that, we saw an all-time high. We saw 126,000. Bitcoin, has this, double top and goes crazy. And then it's been complete down since, as gold and silver are going parabolic. So like the plan was called out, like, sure, yeah, I've been screaming for 5 years or whatever that they're doing this, but like, who the fuck am I? The Kremlin is now going, the US is doing this. And if you're going to, again, subscribe to the multipolarity thing, we smash through this all-time high. Maybe they buy a bunch of Bitcoin, who knows? But then it's just absolute straight down basically since that all-time high, and gold and silver are going absolutely bonkers during that entire time. So if this is the beginning of the debasement trade, Bitcoin has gone down 40% and gold and silver are just gone gangbusters. So it's interesting that, this idea was pointed out by one of the closest advisors to Putin. And then immediately we see the markets, crash at the time that you would expect this to be, going crazy and going up. So there seems to be, if there is war games going on with financial systems, there's an argument to be made that they're fighting it on the blockchain. If this is all just theater, which I personally subscribe to, then, I think, what would they do first? Would they pump the thing that they want to stay in first, or would they pump the thing that they want everybody to be in, and then they monetize the other thing? So to me, I think it's very interesting that, gold and silver are going gangbusters while Bitcoin's been pooping. Obviously, Bitcoin has outpaced gold and silver, hundreds of percents over the last 15 years. It's not even close. But at this moment, when you would expect debasement, precious metals are dominating. So yeah, to me, it seems likely, again, that it's being pointed out on the national stage. People are noticing. Maybe there is some sort of factional fighting going on. Maybe it is multipolarity. But either way, I think the idea that, it's just a signpost of what's coming, that there's huge change coming, that these people are calling it out, at this high of a level.
Yeah, and so I had the next question for that. And, this is why I really love my own Telegram channel. X completely sucks in this regard, but with my Geopolitics and Empire Telegram channel, I just typed in, everything is archived there, and the search works. X, it doesn't work at all. And so I just typed in my own public Geopolitics channel, Russia stablecoin, and it pulled it right up. Putin's advisor, Kobyakov. And that's from the Russia Direct channel, and people can see that. But then my question becomes, do Russia and China get eaten by the Borg? I had on Brent Johnson, and he says, and it makes sense, and they've done this with every technology. DARPA created this stuff, and so now Russia and China have to create the equivalent. If I was using the example of the CFR recently. I think they helped push Russia and China together into this, quote, multipolar bloc, supranational globalist bloc. For me, multipolarism is globalism. It's world government rebranded, recalibrated. That's what the Chinese say themselves in their own papers. Okay, people, and it's like the CFR put out an article some weeks ago saying, well, look, they formed this supranational, which means synonym for globalist bloc. Well, I guess we need to do the same now. So it's kind of that Hegelian dialectic. Yeah. And so it's kind of like the U.S. creates, Brent was saying, and so U.S. creates this Bitcoin dollar stablecoins, and that means China will have to create its own version, or Russia, and you've got folks talking about when I heard of the BRICS coin, a few weeks ago, Pepe. Sorry, Pepe. He's one of the main cheerleaders and Pied Pipers. I like him, but he's the guy who said Russia downed Israeli jets with nukes. The Oreshniks would save Venezuela, and then he's pumping the unit coin. And I'm following Sergei Glaziev. I'm following all those people, and I'm like, literally, the unit is literally. So this was a few weeks ago before they even mentioned Bancor. As soon as I read it, I'm like, that's John Maynard Keynes's Bancor rebranded. And then a few weeks later, another article actually comes out and actually says, yeah, this is, it's comparing it to the Bancor. So how do you think Russia, China, and the rest of the world react or gets eaten? Does Russia get stable coins and use them with their interactions with the West, or do they just create their own equivalents of, you have the digital yuan or whatever?
Well, I think it's interesting that you said that the sort of Hegelian, one hand pushes and then the other one has to push back, but it's a controlled, it's not black and white. There's like a gray master controlling the black and white. It's interesting that is the general narrative of what happened with the CBDC, the digital yuan, where apparently, Libra, right? The stablecoin project of Facebook that was very early on before really anybody was hip to stablecoins being the financial weapon that it is. They were like, oh, let's make a stablecoin. This will be so great. And, the US government, right? Because obviously, Facebook didn't come out of the US government. It's a private sector thing. LifeLog. Anyways, they they announced that they're creating this digital currency and they're going to do the Libra project, and they immediately get called to Congress, and Congress is just like, you have too many, 200 something million active monthly users. Like, this would compete with the dollar and this, and they do this big hoorah, and it's this whole big thing. And a bunch of central banks around the world, the Bank of England made a bunch of notes about this, Bank of Canada, but specifically China, as a reaction to this idea that there would be a digital currency with that many active users coming out of the United States, that it then did eventually turn into being a US dollar stablecoin. And even the head developer of it said, we would turn this into a CBDC if needed, if we would just replace the unit with the CBDC if that's where it came to. But it started as a basket of currencies, then it turned into a US dollar stablecoin. But regardless, this dialectic of, hey, we're going to create a digital currency. Then the Congress gets all mad about it and makes this big show about, here's how it has to be decentralized. It can't be like this. You can't have these business interests in it. And China apparently was so scared of the Libra project that they went out and did their CBDC basically immediately after and trialed it at the Olympics. And the general narrative, the accepted book narrative of that timeline is, Libra announces it, the US government gets super scared, and then China reacts and gets super scared, and then they have to create their own digital currency. So there's already that is already in the narrative already, that it's this back and forth and oh shit, well, because they did this, we have to do this. So I find that all very interesting. I also find it all theater. Obviously, the US government wasn't upset about the fact that, tons of people around the world that view Facebook as the internet. A lot of places around the world, Facebook is the portal to the internet. You think the US government wouldn't want all those people to have access to a dollar stable coin with their Facebook account? Are you kidding me? Of course. It's of course they would want that. It's a wet dream for financial policy and surveillance. I mean, why would you not want that? It's so much control over the world. Why would you not want that? Of course they wanted that. And then so that China gets also super scared, and then they do that. But yeah, I mean, I just don't, the technology transfers that occurred, sort of in the Iran Contra, and I'm not an expert on that stuff, so I don't want to talk about it too much, but there's enough history of tech transfer, of these proprietary technologies that were created in the US being brought to Europe, being brought to Israel, being brought to China, being commercialized there, brought to Japan, industrialized there. Technology transfer, depending on how it's done, is a weapon in itself. And while it can seem like, we're giving you military weapons and secrets and this and that, it's like there's usually always a catch and a reason why you're doing that. And I think it's very clear that the vast majority of blockchain technology was built in the United States by U.S. Researchers, or maybe not even U.S. researchers, but built by U.S. companies in the jurisdiction of the United States. And to me, this idea that China and the U.S. are anything but bedfellows is a joke. I mean, it's just our economies are completely reliant on each other. I mean, I think Lutnick said this today. I mean, it's fun that this is going on during Davos, but I think he said something. He's like, China's our biggest enemy, and they make all of our medicine. Like, isn't that crazy? Like, we can't do that. Like, we can't be reliant on an adversary to make all of our medicine and our technology and all of our chips and our food. And it's like, well, yeah, because they're not an adversary. I mean, they're just, there are some, on some levels, you could argue that they are. And there are some points that I'm not an expert on China-US relations, but like from an economic tech and just, basic industrializing of goods and who are they going to sell it to, and it's like the yin and yang of China and the US. It's just like, how are we are certainly not at war. We are, if anything, working together to just dominate more and more and control the world by playing very specific roles.
Well, and just, I mean, this is what I've been talking a lot about. Convergence. Years ago, I interviewed the director of the European Council on Foreign Relations, Mark Leonard, and he wrote a book on this. And he said he used the term mimetic, where they're going to start mirroring each other. So the West will become more Chinafied, and the East will become use some of this technology and capitalist mentality. But you've had Anatoly Golitsyn. I've got his books from decades ago, Perestroika Deception, where he talks about convergence. And I think Anthony Sutton, I mean, he writes about how during the Bolshevik Revolution afterward, through the Red Cross, the U.S. transferred technology to the Soviet Union. The 70s, 80s. I had a guest on, Miklos Lukas. People can check out the archive. He's excellent. He's Peruvian, and he mentioned how in the 1990s Microsoft set up shop in China, and who was Hu Jintao at the time. When he went to visit the U.S., the first stop was Microsoft, Bill Gates, not Washington. And then they set up the AI centers in China. So China was built. So this whole multipolar dialogue just doesn't make sense. And so it seems like, in 2020, I said COVID was about bringing us to a global algocracy. It's a one world government. I mean, the whole point of convergence is what H.G. Wells said, the democratic socialist world state. And it just, and to your point, this week, they're pointing out how China is building the mega embassy in London, and it's going to plug into the underbelly, the fiber optics. Like that's to your point. Like Carney just went out to Beijing, and the fact that the city of London is allowing China potentially to plug into the fiber optics that carries all the trading data, financials, it's like symbiotic. It's the Borg. It's coming together. So I mean, in your mind, I guess we're moving towards this world state.
Yeah, and also it's like, I don't think it's something where like this is a new development and it's just like, oh yeah, maybe China wasn't with us, but now it's like the establishment of the CCP. Like, it's very interesting. I actually, so I grew, I spent a lot of time in San Francisco, like 12 years, and San Francisco has this really interesting, obviously there's a lot of secret societies there, and a lot of like this sort of, you want to come out of US power and out of US politics, like that Northern California is one of the best ways to come out. I mean, that's where we've, Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris and a lot of these, Reagan and, so many, huge power people in the sort of mob taking over the US government, in the last 70 years, San Francisco and California has played this like huge role. And it's really interesting that people never talk about like China's influence on California and, how they really built a lot of California. And San Francisco has this really big, I don't want to say underbelly in like a derogatory way necessarily, but like there's a huge Chinese presence in San Francisco that is really not discussed on a global level. And there, I actually went on this walking tour of Chinatown in San Francisco, many years ago. And the talk of the town there, the legend basically is that they have these sort of communal fraternal like meeting places called tong houses. And the basically what became the document that became the essentially the constitution for the modern Chinese state was written in a tong house in San Francisco. It's Chinatown. And so this idea of like, and again, I don't have sourcing for that. But when I look at the commonality between the nexus of power that is just very prominent in San Francisco and in California and in the US, and then you look at, okay, China, like, it really is, this huge test bed for so many of the technological things that are now being released into the West. I think that convergence model is the correct model. I've never really heard it put so eloquently. I completely agree. And you just look at the players, like you look at these people that are claiming to be, America first, and we're onshoring everything, and it's like Elon Musk is not an anti-China guy. Like, what are we talking about? I mean, these people are just not. There's Larry Fink is not an anti-China guy. Like there is an insane amount of money that has gone back and forth between China and Fink's groups. It's a joke in my opinion to say that that's really the separate entity that they're warring against each other when they're so reliant on each other economically and technologically, production wise, whatever. And I do think we will see an onshoring in many ways back to the United States, but not as an act of war against China, but just that like it has served its purpose. The US, China, we create the money, you create the goods, and then we have this big by design trade deficit, and then we basically take over the global economy. That role has been played. It's over. We don't need to continue playing that. We can now have industrial methods down to a pretty good science where as long as you have the rare earth and the energy, you can make all the batteries and make all the pharmaceuticals and make, you can really make them kind of anywhere. And, now we have autonomous, facilities. We don't necessarily need cheap labor or basically slave labor. We can kind of do it. We can do it in America. We can chip fab in America, and it's fine because we're using robots to turn the little screws and whatever. So the role that was very cleverly designed, for both of these countries' economies to play, I think it's kind of over. Where Russia plays into it, I don't know. I'm not an expert on geopolitical, certainly as it relates to Russia. I'm just not a historian on that. But it seems to me that, the Russia played a big role with the Ukraine invasion in the sense that it was a test bed for the new modern warfare, drone warfare. It was also a big test bed for, let's use cryptocurrency as in the act of war. Buying drones and this and aid coming in via all these different methods. And, crypto was a huge part of the money laundering scheme that was basically that event. And is that event. And the other big signpost from that was the seizure of Russian assets in the treasury market of the US that really kicked off a lot of the, controlled issues, the controlled demolition of the treasury market in a lot of ways of like the dollar being the world reserve currency. The dollar is still the world reserve currency, but the world reserves being treasuries. If we can just seize your treasuries, at a whim and take them back, how is this really worth it as a reserve asset? Wouldn't we rather move to gold or maybe say Bitcoin eventually? So it really broke on the national scale the idea of, or international scale of finding an alternative to U.S. treasuries from from a national or international level. So Russia has played a lot of really, and also, that Russian guy saying calling it for what it is, that the US is going to use cryptocurrency to solve its debt issue. Russia this is very obviously played a lot of important roles in this, I would say, global theater to create the scenario for, basically the Great Reset, but just with right-wing branding. And instead of the ESG woke, let's do all this to save the planet. It's like, let's do all this to own the commies and the libtards. And it's like, but it's the same agenda.
No, and you mentioned they're also using the 15-minute city, and I'm tracking
sure.
every week on my weekly analysis. I'm looking at these stories this week in my paid subscriber analysis, tracking stories, and I've been saying it since forever. I use the meme Skynet is becoming self-aware, and so
right.
What IDF Israel is doing with the AI drones and the Palantirs, and they're using all these testing grounds, Ukraine, and they're saying now all of that stuff. They're upping the annual productions. They're hitting from tens of thousands it was first. Now it's hundreds of thousands of drones. Now it's going to be multiple millions.
Yeah.
And then that stuff is being exported to the rest of the world. So they're building out Skynet, and every country is going to use that stuff now against us. And it was funny this week. I mean, Putin. He was just saying now, he was basically saying, if I caught the clip today, Greenland, that's okay. Trump can take, Greenland. And so it's kind of like, what is going on here? And then, I just wanted to get your further thoughts on I was listening to you on Coffee on a Mic, and you cited Geopolitics and Empire, my use of the term algorithm ghetto. But I stole that from Edwin Black. Edwin Black I really respect his work. And we have to learn to separate people. Yeah, okay, he's a Zionist, whatever. He's Jewish heritage, but his work you can't argue with. His books, I got on eugenics, Master War Against the Weak, and IBM and the Holocaust, and where he started using the term newgenics, what we're headed into, and the algorithm ghetto, which he compares to the back in the day, you're put in physical ghettos in Germany, sure. And now this is what they're doing, the equivalent. And it's funny because, when I moved in my gated community here in Mexico, 2020, when COVID happened, I said, one day, I told my wife, look, one day they're going to install biometric exit and entry, and this is going to end up an algorithm ghetto. And it happened a few months ago. They installed biometric exit and entry, and they want everyone to use a digital app. I've fought it off for now, but just your further thoughts on this is moving so fast. I was kind of joking, not joking about, to people listening, I'll be your beta tester for the Mark of the Beast. And, this happened with a lot of the folks, 2021, and get taken off of Patreon, hit pieces in the media. DHS takes me off of PayPal. And then, yet last night, I tried to leave a review for Patrick Wood and Courtney Turner's book on Amazon. Right. So I had J. Michael Waller, who I interviewed. Amazon wouldn't publish my review, but now, and then they eventually published it. But now I went to write a review, and it says, I will share the screen just for a second here. Where is it? Just to show people the screenshot. This is what I got. It says, we apologize, but this account has not met the minimum eligibility requirements to write a review. If you would like to learn more about our eligibility requirements, see our community guidelines. I changed my profile photo to Winston Smith. And so my question for you then is, how do you see this technocracy that we're headed into? Obviously, what they're doing with Venezuela and Greenland is patching together the TechNate, right? North American Union.
Yeah, seems like it.
And then, digital ID is coming in, digital passports, biometric exit entry systems, nation by nation. We have 5 months here in Mexico to register our phones, or they're shut off. If we don't go this year to get our Mexican digital ID, I can't buy or sell. Effectively, you can't buy or sell, like the Bible says. And so the electronic thought crime authorizations, as I call them, the electronic travel authorizations. So now when you go to UK or the US or the EU, and I'm pretty sure more countries will add this, it's like the e-visa. You have to pay 10, 20 bucks and fill out the social credit form. And if they're going to do the profile check on you, and if they don't like your political views, religious views, you can never go to that country again. And so how do you sort of see this rolling out, this global algocracy, technocracy?
Yeah, I mean, No, I think you nailed it, and that phrase has resonated with me immediately when I heard it. Because in the same way, again, I point to Ian Davis, as being a thought leader on this, but he had this great um, phrase of that, like, government isn't the enabling environment. It just serves to be the enabling environment for whatever the handlers want the world to go. As government acts just as the goop that the catalysts engage in. And to me, yeah, algorithmic ghetto is unfortunately so perfect, and I think it plays in perfectly into my sort of framework of, there will be people that have assets, and then the people that are forced to use stable coins or the equivalent. There will be this bifurcation, this new kind of class system, where there will be people that will have some form of economic freedom, and then there will be people that will have none. And the way that net is being built, this kind of roundabout way, it's very concerning, and it should be very concerning. I'm seeing the slow rollout everywhere. I mean, I hear it from everybody I talk to. There's a new thing. There's a new, a town over where I am is now, to be able to park in the town, you need to use this app on your phone. There's no, otherwise you get fined. And apparently there's a lot of issues with, they're having trouble tracking down the people, and apparently it's pretty easy to avoid, but the slow boil is not really so slow anymore. And that line in the sand moment is going to be very hard for a lot of people, because digital ID is going to be so interoperable, and it will be so hard to really move around, unless you comply with these systems. And to me, the algorithmic ghetto is like, it's so multifaceted, where it's not just financial. It's which is very, I think the financial system is easy to see how because there's already class systems in the financial system, right? Like, there are people who have assets, people who have income, people who, have, land, commodities, whatever. And then there's the people that don't. And then there's the people that are paycheck to paycheck, but still have some form of income keeping them afloat that's not dependent necessarily on the government. And then there's like welfare state and people that are dependent on subsidies to live. There's already a trifurcation or whatever in the financial system. It's easy to see. But when it comes to like thought and content creation and freedom of movement and the ability to organize and the ability to exchange ideas and content and have people come together to fight some of these power structures, the algorithmic ghetto on thought and on organization and on humanity, on the arts, on we've already seen like what Spotify has done to the music industry. It's been extremely bad for the music industry. What iTunes has done, there's a lot of freedom that came from everybody being able to create music in their homes with laptops, and it decentralized the studio industry. But the actual content distribution is now actually way more centralized than ever. And to become a famous band now, like, it's now even more nepotism than ever. You can't really make it on a college radio station. It's like you have to get into that Spotify daily list, or you have to get on to play Bonnaroo or Lollapalooza, and you have to get into the tastemakers now have actually like completely centralized the arts. You got to get on Netflix to be able to have a popular movie. Like, it's really hard. Yes, you can buy a camera and make a movie. And like, some of amazing albums and movies are being made now, but no one is seeing them. And a lot of my friends, I came up in the arts, and so many of my friends are doing that. Like, I've had friends that I grew up with that have made like full feature amazing movies that are really, really good, high quality production. They looked amazing. They're well written. And unfortunately, probably at the end of the day, under 10,000 people have seen it. Right. And that's just like, that sucks. And so the algorithmic ghetto, like, when everything is, it appears to be, like X, it appears to be this freedom of speech platform and yada, 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 but it's not. And the algorithm, as it has gone from being the local college DJ or the Tower Records employee being like, oh, I love this Ween album or whatever, to now it's like, the content god algorithm that tells you what comes up on your YouTube page that recommends something to you is literally run by like Leor Cohen or whatever. It's like YouTube Music is, there's a lot of issues of shout out to a great piece by Whitney Webb and Kalani about the Diddy story and about the record industry, and these people. Leor Cohen is heavily featured in that, but he runs YouTube Music, and it's like it's become really centralized. You look at how is this content being distributed? It's now controlled by algorithms, which are controlled by people. AI is now going to be said to control all these algorithms, like the X algorithm. But who controls the AI? Who's feeding the AI the data? How easily can you be flagged when you are now a database member and a QSIP? How easy is it to flag a dissonant and say you cannot post a review on Amazon? You cannot say this book is good. And so the algorithm ghetto like creeps in everywhere. It's not just digital ID and freedom of movement and financial classes. It's now like human thought and distribution. And we're just fed slop. And sometimes I will go and into these slot mines and just to see what is short. I mean, I've never been on a TikTok app, but like YouTube Shorts is just TikTok. I mean, there's no difference. And you look at like what it's feeding you and how it works, and you begin to see it's like, okay, like that was an oddly sexual fucking thing. Why are they pumping that? You can't even use X without seeing lewd stuff. You can't go on 4chan without seeing just incredibly gross, insane things. At least on 4chan, it's sort of used as a filter to like keep people out, I guess. But even that has been completely overrun. It turned into like they turned Twitter into 4chan and then 4chan into Twitter, and now they both just suck. And like there's very few places, unless you were literally going to something like your Telegram channel that's curated by a human fucking being and a bunch of his friends that are dumping things in there. It's like it's really hard to find a source that is not just the homogenized algorithm. And so to me, the algorithm of Ghetto is so multifaceted and so disturbing that like we're going to lose the ability to organize because we're not even going to think about organizing. We're going to lose the ability to create because we're not even going to think about creating. We're going to lose the ability to fight back these powers that are centralizing because we're not even going to know they're there. We're not even going to notice.
Pluribus. I just finished watching all this propaganda. Often cite Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. The latest was Pluribus, which was difficult to get through, but everyone becomes this Borg mind. And when to your point, to some of my neighbors that I've spoken to, and one of them is awake and understands the principles of liberty, security, sure, and this techno-fascism. And I'm throwing out 1984 references, Orwell, Huxley, Brave New World. I'm like, yeah, this was predicted and all I get is a blank stare. And these are adults. And I'm like, wait a minute, you don't even know who Orwell is or Huxley? Like, if you don't have those cultural references, you have no idea what I'm saying, nor the gravity of what is happening. And it's just mind blowing. And I think that's part of that process that you just described, this Borg hive mind. And then the worst part, I get what you're saying about the algorithm ghetto, and then ultimately that all ends up in their ability to dish out civil death, social death.
Sure.
And we're seeing that now in the European Union. A whole bunch of European citizens have been now sanctioned, and they are now under civil death. They can't buy food, bank account, travel, use no apps or platforms. And so that's where it's all going. Maybe to sort of wind down here, where besides buying Bitcoin, stacking some sats, what any tips on how to survive the cyber gulag? I think often a lot of us repeat this. It's just common sense, I think, like you said, land with a house, water, food, gold, silver, a car, transport. So physical assets plus stuff like Bitcoin. Just thoughts on how to weather the storm.
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing about the cultural reference thing because obviously there's some controversy with them recently because of Israel stuff, but Radiohead just did a reissue of Hail to the Thief. They're like, I think it's 2003, album that, obviously kind of talks about a lot of these things. And yeah, I was watching some interviews of them talking about Hail to the Thief, and Tom York is talking, and someone is like, it's so crazy going back and listening to Hail to the Thief and just like how accurate you were about just predicting what was going to happen and just how bad things have become, And he's just like, no, I wasn't predicting things. Things were that bad in 2003. I was writing about how bad things were, about political power and surveillance. I mean, there's some really it's always incredibly hard to hear what the hell he's saying, but there's some really prudent stuff about surveillance and listening in and Hail to the Thief. There's it's a very politically charged record. But it's so funny that someone was interviewing them and being like, man, you predicted the 2020s in 2003. He's like, no, I was writing about what was going on then. It was happening then. Now it's just, we can see it. And I think as these cycles compress, and we can notice more and more. COVID was a very big wake up for a lot of people. I think it got more people woke up than any other event. 2001, 9/11 was huge, but I think a lot of us were pretty young, or didn't have a lot of agency to do much. That was a big wake up though. And then COVID has been the other big one. And it's now, okay, well, we're so far along into this game. It's well, what do you really do to save yourself? And so I think you nailed it. Pretty much everything you said. Get land, get four walls, dig a well, get water. Don't be dependent on state water. And as much as we hate the ESG stuff, and a lot of it is stupid, alternative energy is a good idea. If you live out in the middle of nowhere and you get solar panels, that's a great idea. Get some batteries, dig some holes, put some gasoline in a little thing, get ready to in case pumps get shut off. Or it's not that I think that the collapse will happen in that way. I don't think it will. I think there's a lot more, it's more advantageous for them to do this slow. You don't even realize that society has collapsed, and you're just oh, wait, I haven't worked a job, and now my day-to-day time is spent looking at slop, but I get paid ads, and then the ads can pay for my Grubhub delivery, and it's dropped off on the drone, and whatever. You can get as you can have as much fun imagining the hell that could happen. I don't think it will be this sort of fall of man, Red Dawn thing or whatever. But be prepared for that. I think it's just common sense to not have any reliance. If any shit hits any fan, just have your bases covered. It's not prepper. It's not crazy. It's not a bad idea to grow a garden. It's not a bad idea to have some food in your cabinet and in storage. And it's also not a bad idea to get a bunch of fun tools and fun stuff. It's not just, okay, we need power tools and long arms. It's get a loot, get some instruments, create, have things to be able to create, get a 3D printer. Get some technology that's not going to be completely borked, and get some computers you can run Linux on or whatever. And, get a bunch of wood, I don't know, whatever it is for you, but I think as many ways as you can sever the umbilical cord of the state as possible can only possibly help you, and it cannot get in the way. The umbilical cord will always be there. The teat will always be there. The convenience will always be there, because that's how they get you. So if you ever need to go to convenience land, you can go there. It's going to be there. But if you don't want to go there, how do you prevent yourself from going there? That's the contingency plan that I think people need to have. And it's not, they've demonized it to be this crazy thing, and it's not. I am not a paranoid, crazy person. I'm not. I'm a pretty normal dude. And I think everything I've prepared with my family, and not just with my immediate family, my nuclear family, but with my parents and my brothers and my loved ones and my friends. It's again, I said at the beginning, that's where a lot of this kind of quest that ended up me becoming an investigative journalist started. Was I was I don't trust this thing. I get bad vibes. I think people should buy Bitcoin. Wait, I just told people to buy Bitcoin. Maybe I should be sure about that. I just bought a bunch of people hardware wallets and gave them a bunch of Bitcoin, and I did all that, because it was just out of love of I love you and I want you to be safe if some fucked up shit happens. And so many people, not so many people, but a strong handful of people have reached out to me since and been you really did change things for me there. And like, it's not like, all my friends are these crazy hardcore Bitcoin propagandists, or whatever, but like they were able to like feel comfortable to have a kid because they had another $5,000 in their bank account that they wouldn't have had without Bitcoin. And that just made them feel a little bit more comfy about where they're going next. And that, to me, that comfort and that contingency is literally priceless. So if you can buy it now before things get insane and the inevitability of hyperinflation does happen, it's going to go way slower than people think, but it is going to happen. It just is the math. Get things while you still can buy things. While things still have a dollar value, go buy the things that you need to live a good life. Do it slowly, do it safely, or do it fast, whatever. I mean, all of this stuff is so personal and the context is so different for everybody. I would not give the same advice to my 70-year-old parents that I would give to my, Zoomer neighbor friend or whatever. It's just a completely different landscape of what the world's going to be like. If you're not going to be around in 30 years, it's a lot different than if you're going to be here for another 60. Your risk profiles are all different, So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's a great answer, but I think you have to find your lines in the sand, know where you will not back down, and then don't just build for hell. Like build for heaven, build for a great life. Make sure that your life is sick. Like I know that I could walk away and never do another public appearance or write another thing and just garden and hang out with my family and make music. And I would live a completely happy life and not have to be dependent on pretty much anything. I can sleep very well at night knowing that. And it's not because I'm like afraid that someone's going to bust in my door and raid my compound, and I have to defend, drones coming at me with a gun or whatever. It's like, I don't think like that. I'm ready to build the life that I want. That's very outside of the algorithmic ghetto. And so however you can get to good living, do it. And there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of channels. The most important thing, I'll leave it at this, is you have to be informed. That's the basis of all of these decisions. So the only thing that I will demand that you do, listener, is just learn about what's coming, learn about all these things. Yeah, get in the Geopolitical and Empire Telegram channel, read Ian Davis's book, read UH Unlimited Hangout, and just get informed because the decision is yours to make. It can only be yours to make. And that's the whole point. If anyone else is making the decision for you, you're fucked. So get informed so you can make the decision for yourself.
That is great final thought. I had just a final question real quick. What's your estimation? Like we said, Bitcoin can crash, but what is your estimation, given the context of everything we've discussed and where we're going? How high can it go? I mean, was it Binance said 200,000? But I mean, what could one reasonably expect? I'm trying to gauge like the fraction of Bitcoin that I have. Yeah. If it goes this high, that means I'll be this much.
Exactly. When you're busting out the calculator, like, okay, if XRP goes to $30, then I don't like doing price predictions in any frame other than long term because it's just we are in the cyclone and like we are a tweet away from $150,000 and we're a tweet away from $30,000. Like that is just the reality. I don't think either of those things are happening imminently. But that's just true. Like we are literally at that point, which is why I say I think it's important that people consider getting some because we are at a true social post away from going parabolic in either direction. But I think long term, my base case has sort of been that by 2030 we would be like getting close to seven figures, like close to $1 million a coin, which I know seems insane. It could take 50 years. It could take 15 years. It could be zero in 15 days. I don't know. But so far, it has sort of just kind of trended up. And it's not necessarily like Bitcoin doesn't have flaws and that's why it's going up. But like its unit of account that we base its purchasing power on is the dollar. And we know for sure that the relative purchasing power of the dollar will go down. So anything that is priced in dollars will be more expensive in dollars. Like that is as over the long term. There will be deflationary moments, but over the long term, the dollar is doomed to inflate forever. It is just what it does. It is the purpose of what it does. That is the point of what the dollar is supposed to do. And so for that reason, I think Bitcoin could go extremely, extremely high, even into the millions, which seems so crazy. But if you're banking on that, like I'm taking out a loan and I needed to go to $1 million in 18 months, you are an idiot and you will probably lose more money than you will make. And people do that in the Bitcoin space all the time. Like they like leverage their Bitcoin, they get loans to it's like you're not bullish enough on the thing that you're so bullish on if you think you need to be 110% exposed to it. I mean, that said, like I generally I don't time things. I don't try to like sell markets or buy, buying bottoms a little bit. I can understand, but like I don't try to time anything or try to be smart. I'm not a trader. If I need it for something, if I need to buy something, if there's an emergency, a medical thing, if there's a piece of property that I need to help someone with or whatever the fuck, that's not a good example because that's never happened. But, like if there's something that needs to get done and I'll just sell it and I won't even care that, oh, I could have sold it yesterday for 5% more. Who cares? I'm past that point. It's just, I use it. It's my savings. I don't use it as much as of a speculation element as it is my savings account. And that has been the best framework for me. If I have leftover money that I think I'm not going to use for 5 years, it goes in Bitcoin. And that's the framework, knowing that it could go to zero. So, and then any of the other coins, it's lottery tickets. I get buying Ethereum, I get buying XRP, I get buying Chainlink or whatever you think is going to be the new thing. But all of those things are lottery tickets. It's purely dependent on social and political decisions. Bitcoin to me at least has some sort of commodity qualities where I think no matter what, there will be people playing with Bitcoin in 50 years. The chain will still exist. It will still be there. Whether or not it's worth 5 cents or $5 million, I don't know, but I'm like pretty certain that at least from a technological standpoint, it will still be there. I don't know if that's true of any of the other ones. So yeah, I don't like to talk about price because I just don't know. But yeah, I mean, we could see it go extremely high if there's extreme debasement. I mean, that's absolutely possible. The US has to deal with what, like $11 trillion of debt this year. They're going to have to deal with almost 40 trillion, in total. I don't know, in the next 30 years or whatever, looking at however long the maturities of these bonds are, and just that those trillions have to go somewhere. And when there's that much monetary stimulus, I mean, we saw it with COVID, we saw a huge expansion of the Bitcoin price because of that. And so I would hold gold, I would hold silver, I'd hold land, and I would hold Bitcoin and and not become black pilled and hope that everything lands okay and that people don't lose everything and we don't create this bifurcation of economic classes. But if it's going to happen, I'd rather you, dear listener, not be in the stablecoin slave class, and I'd rather you be able to have a family and pass something on to them and build an alternative to the algorithmic ghetto, because we're going to need as many people as possible that get it, because it's going to get weird if that plays out that way. And like, we need you, we need you desperately. So I hope no matter what happens and whatever decision you make, I hope you're free.
We don't want you eating the Soylent Green.
No.
So we've covered the waterfront banger, 2 hours. All of the links are in the description, so I encourage people to. I mean, it's the easiest thing. This is what I do with all of the. I mean, that's why I'm able to aggregate my feed so well, because I'm following all of these people, paying attention to what they're saying, incorporating it, and get the books. Papercut Publishing, everything is linked. Any other best website or project we should know about?
I mean, unfortunately, my only real distribution that's like personal is my Twitter account, which is Mark Good W _IN, Mark Goodwin with an underscore between the W and the I. But I write for Unlimited Hangout, and obviously co-founded paper cut publishing house, and we'll be doing a lot more stuff there. So, yeah, I guess you can follow me on Twitter because that is where I will update things. But I've been trying to not go on it nearly as much because it's just been an uncomfortable place for me recently. I just don't like it very much, and I don't get anything from it. There's just I just don't. But it is still, I have 18,000 friends there or whatever, and I love a lot of those people. So I will still be posting stuff there, and that is probably the easiest way to follow me. But yeah, I mean, I just, it's just not a very good place anymore. So I try not to be on there as much.
All right. Well, thanks for the time, Mark. And what else can we say? May the odds be in everyone's favor.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, just, I am not a financial advisor. I'm not even an economist. I'm just a guy with an internet account who wants everyone to be safe. And I think that this might be one of the best ways. And like, please don't be stupid. Practice, safe investing and safe saving, and don't be dumb. And because if this is the great change and there's a big change in the financial system, you don't want to blow it, and be right directionally, but play it wrong and get greedy. So just be safe and do what's best for you. And if you do want to talk to financial advisors, do it. But I am not one. And best of luck to you.